Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us here in this educational program. We have a very special guest, and it is a real honor to have him with us here today. Garry Jacobs, welcome, and thank you for joining us here in this live conversation.
Thanos, thank you so much for this invitation. I'm very happy to be with you.
We apologize in advance if there is any technical problems. I believe we will have the conversation with no technical issues, and we will discuss here today the critical role of technology in advancing human security for all. Before starting with a series of questions I have for you, Garry, let me say a few words about your background, although those who are watching us, they are already aware of your extraordinary career as the president and CEO of the World Academy of Art and Science and executive chairman of the global campaign on human security for all, launched by the UN Trust for Human Security. You're an American consultant, author, researcher on business, economy, education, governance, science, and security. Garry Jacobs believes, Garry, believe that technology can be used for good and bad. You run an organization founded by Albert Einstein, among others, also Bertrand Russell, Robert Oppenheimer in 1960, that realized the development of nuclear fission had both peaceful and devastating applications, consequences. Today, Jacob, for all of you who are watching us, wants to harness the power of technology to help close equity gaps by reaching the most vulnerable children and youth and ensuring learning continues in times of crisis. Garry, thank you once again. I would like to have a little bit of a brief introduction from you about um, the current status of the nuclear threat. I would like to say that, as we know, with the end of the Cold War, we thought, most of us thought, that the nuclear threat has safely and finally under control. Now it has risen its head again, as we all see. Along with it, we see the threat posed by drone warfare, which can be conducted by anyone without need of an army, the digital warfare driven to disrupt the systems and the networks that drive modern society, modern democracies, and new applications at the same time, like the artificial intelligence, causing a lot of excitement, but at the same time generating concerns how the artificial intelligence will disrupt our societies, our democracies, and brings not only opportunities and solutions, but also new, more serious threats. The question here is there anything that can be done to stop this spiral of new threats generated by science and technology?
Well, Thanos, your question really goes to the heart of the work of the World Academy, in fact, to the origin of the World Academy. You mentioned some of our distinguished founders. Actually, the underlying occasion was after Albert Einstein wrote to President Roosevelt in 1939, advising him of the necessity of the U.S. developing atomic weapons before the opponents do. And that led to Robert Oppenheimer becoming the head of the Manhattan Project, which developed the first atomic bomb. And then to many of our scientists coming to later see we've got a Cold War, we've got an arms race, we've got something that threatens to destroy all of humanity. And what is the responsibility of the scientists for this? You know, up until we tend to forget that up until around the 40s, science was not in the mainstream. The technology's been around for a long time, but most of our technology in the 19th century and early 20th century was developed by inventors, not scientists. People like Edison or Alexander Graham Bell or Marconi and Tesla and people like that. But since the last half of the 20th century, science has really come into its own as a very powerful organization. Up until then, scientists considered themselves kind of like we live in an ivory tower, we study reality, we come up with new theories, we test them, and that's our work, ends there. But suddenly, in the mid-50s, scientists were confronted with the fact that we could be the cause of the end of the world, of the end of humanity, and it's out of control, and it's not in our control anymore. And this raised a very important point on the social responsibility of science. Science can no longer say we just think and invent or think about things and other people do them. And I think this is something we're still trying to digest. And you've mentioned many other very good examples of that today. The controversy, a lot of it's about the artificial intelligence. And how does society learn to manage and control the application and distribution of knowledge? Of course, we've learned to do it in some ways, but the nuclear threat, as well as many others like the artificial intelligence today, the problem is it's not under the control of any nation by itself. These are technologies that require the full cooperation of global society, especially the major powers who control them. And as you know, and our listeners know, we've been struggling for decades to get the limited number of nuclear powers to agree that this technology is too dangerous for anybody to possess. It's not creating greater security for us. It's not giving us an advantage. It's actually increasing the threat and increasing the incentives for other people to develop it. So that points to the question you asked, how do we do this? We need, the reason the UN was founded, and particularly the treaties that were signed after the founding of the UN, was the recognition that it's no longer just up to a nation state or a government, whether it's elected or autocratic, to do these things. We need cooperation at the global level. We need a multilateral system that will really support cooperation to the benefit of all humanity, to the security of all human beings, which is what this theme of human security is all about. Our problem is our technology and our science has outstripped our governance systems. We've not yet developed the kind of global governance that can fully control the weapons or the use for which our technology goes. It's happening. We're making some progress on it, but we still have a long way to go.
You mentioned, I keep from what you said, two, I think, key words. The one is the word cooperation, and the other is, same equally important term, the social responsibility of science and stakeholders of science. How optimistic are you that these stakeholders in the science field prove their sensitivity about their role to promote and serve social responsibility, not only their own priorities, which every stakeholder has?
Well, that's a big question and a very important one. And we are optimistic about the scientists. We have scientists from all over the world in our academy, and we interact with scientists all over the world. And we think this is widely recognized. The problem is more complex now because once the thing is out of the box, as we say, it's not so easy to put the genie back again. I would say, though, I'm optimistic that we are recognizing more and more the absolute essential requirement for putting in place global structures, laws, systems to do this. But at another level, we've had a practical experience recently, which maybe can help partially answer this. The World Academy partnered with the Consumer Technology Association, which represents the big IT, the big electronic companies from all over the world, thousands of members who put on this Consumer Electronics Show every year to show the latest new technology. And we approached them a year ago and to see what their answer to what your question. And we said, look, we're working with the United Nations on a global campaign to promote human security. And business and technology, the technology leaders have a tremendous role to play, both positively in addressing human security needs and negatively, of course, in letting genies out of the box, which we later have to try to control. Would you be willing to partner with us to project to your industry, to the hundreds of, actually 150, 120,000 leaders came to their conference, to their exhibition last month? And what do you think about that? And they came back to us, they consulted their board and said, we absolutely agree with you. We think that our member companies, big and small, have to realize the responsibility that we have, not only as the scientists, but the technologists, but the business leaders, to see that our technology is used for the common good, that it is promoting and solving human security problems rather than creating them. Maybe this is a recent trend. Maybe it's fed by the fact that we have the nuclear threat rising again, and everybody's questioning, what's the solution to this? Maybe it's due to widespread concern about artificial intelligence. But I can say we were very encouraged by the positive response that not only the leaders of the industry, but the member companies enthusiastically embraced and said, yes, this is our responsibility. So I don't want to whitewash the challenges. We're still fighting, struggling with the nuclear. But I think this is something that's coming into its own. And that's why we've launched this campaign for this and related reasons, to really show different sectors of the society our responsibility. It's not up to just government. Government alone cannot do this. We need the full support of the global public behind the human security move.
I would like to stay a little bit longer in this conversation that we have you here as our guest speaker at this educational program of the Association of Foreign Press Correspondents. And I would like to stay a little bit more on our discussion about technological and social progress, uncertainty and insecurity. For millions of people, as we know, life seems to be a little bit more and more insecure every year and than ever before. Today's security threats are no longer isolated events, as we all know. They are not confined to a certain regions or countries. Tragedies taking place in one continent can cross borders and quickly appear to our doorstep. We've seen the devastating effects of COVID-19, for example, the war in Ukraine, and the climate-induced disasters. Everything travel globally. And these incidents and developments that cross borders, devastating, of course, our lives, economies, deepening poverty and inequality, causing millions of people to flee their homes. Prospects for security are made worse by geopolitical, of course, rivalries. Those who use misinformation to divide our societies and erode our democracies, and those who show violent extremism. Our failure to meet these challenges puts, I assume you would agree, our shared future and our planet in peril. So the question is, what is that with all our technological and social progress, why we are still experiencing rising levels of uncertainty and insecurity in our world?
It's a really profound question, and you've raised so many examples of it that we're confronted with today. At this point that our insecurity seems to be rising, with all our economic progress, with all our technological progress, we should all be feeling a lot more secure. But now you mentioned climate change, and climate change tends to threaten all our security of everybody around the world, regardless of whether we're rich or poor or where we live. And yet it's actually connected to the technologies we've developed, the lifestyles we've developed. And I think to go to the root of it, it's a big question with many facets to it, but I think to go to the root to it, we'd have to say, We have a fundamental problem in the way we've been thinking. For centuries, we've been thinking of security as something that we get pretty narrowly defined by protecting ourselves against foreign invasion, protecting ourselves against an enemy, particularly in military terms. And the word security is usually used in common political language as referring to a military support and military threats. But what do we see from the examples you've given? The security threats we face today, and COVID was a dramatic example because COVID cost more lives in the world than almost any catastrophe since World War II. And yet nobody was fighting with anybody else. We were all fighting against a tiny microbe. And we could only do that by global cooperation. So if you really look at the primary security threats we face today, health is one of them, which impacts people all over the world. Even the prosperous people, we struggle with the problems of health coming from our prosperity, from changing our lifestyles. Food at the other end of the spectrum for the poorer. You know, the war in Ukraine has led to drastic food insecurity in countries in Africa because the export of food around the world has been interfered with. Now we're grappling with inflation, again connected with the war and and that's causing job insecurity, even to our highly paid technology people, you know, who are designing new software and all, because huge layoffs have been announced. So what about our job security? Food security, health security, job security. And then there's the security related to not only our economic well-being, but what about our social position? We still have underprivileged and communities and minorities who don't feel secure, either because of their ethnic background or their religion or their nationality, and the distinctions we make. All of these are examples. And of course, the environment. Apart from everything else, we're all into this because of our water. We're running out of water. I'm in Denver now, and we're afraid about the Colorado River, air pollution, and then climate change. I think all of this tells us that we need to rethink our concept of security. And that's what the UN has been doing and why we're collaborating with them. To look at security means food, it means health, it means economic livelihood, it means human rights and political rights. It means the security of a community where we feel safe in our community, and it means the security of each individual. Am I going to have a job tomorrow, or am I on the on the list, or have I done something that the government's going to complain about and find fault with me? So I think our argument is we need a new concept of security that starts with the human being. Our major threats today are not military. And I'm saying that even in spite of the fact that we do have a military threat, which wasn't there a year ago, but is threatening and concerning us today. But still, even today, the real threats are much broader than that. And it's not that it's not that the military security isn't important, but it's a small part of our lives today. But we're spending $2 trillion to protect ourselves against possible threats. And incidentally, that expenditure also increases the possibility of threats because there's a lot more weapons around. But what are we doing to look at the security of each human being? Our national governments are still preoccupied with national military security. We call it defense. Our multilateral institutions, the Security Council in the UN is primarily responsible for military issues, not this whole wide gamut of security needs. So we think we need a fundamental rethinking. Security should relate to each of us has security needs, and society has a responsibility, should have a responsibility for meeting those needs and helping all of us all around the world, not just in one place or another. We want safer communities, we want more rights, and we want to live without fear, without want, without challenges to our human dignity. So I think that's fundamentally, we need a new thinking. And now in the 21st century, that's becoming clear that the real opportunities and the real threats are much wider than we've been thinking of them till now.
Mm-hmm. And from my discussion with you, I understand that now we need to put on the table a broader concept, the human security, which exceeds the limitations and restrictive approaches that governments have been prioritizing related to security, focusing, for example, only on defense, based on what you said. How optimistic are you that governments can prioritize this broader concept of human security? How these efforts can be related to the UN sustainable goals? And the third question that I have for you is, what needs to change in order for us to change this approach to get into the concept of human security? And you also provided a short definition about human security, but if you could provide us a little bit of a more official definition about what we are talking about when we say human security, for the sake of understanding of foreign journalists watching us.
Well, why? Very good questions. I'd like to back up a little. You know, at the end of the World War II, the UN was founded in 1945. It was founded by a small group of nation states. I think about 50 or 55 signed the charter because there weren't that many. There was a lot of the world was under colonial empires. And it was really a treaty of countries wanting to protect themselves from more world wars. It wasn't really about primarily people, individuals. It was really about nation states protecting themselves, whether they were democracies or autocracies or communist or capitalist, whatever it was. But 3 years later, after the founding of the UN, these same countries came together and formulated the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The first time in history that the nations of the world had come together and agreed that every human being, regardless of nationality, religion, or ethnic background, should be treated with the same equal rights. It was a huge breakthrough. U.S. had a big role to play in it. President Roosevelt's wife, Eleanor, was a leader in bringing it together. But it was a global effort and a global consensus. But now, you know, that was how many years ago? Almost 3/4 of a century ago. But that declaration never had the power of law. It was a set of ideals. It was significant, but it was a set of ideals. Now it fast forward to 2015. We now have 193 countries, members of the UN. And for the first time in history, these 193 countries came together and they drew up a document called Agenda 2030 with 17 sustainable development goals, which all of them agreed we must work together unanimously all over the world for the sake of all humanity. And most of these goals relate not only to the society and the nation, they relate to individuals, you know, to the welfare of individuals. And since then, the UN spearheaded this initiative and has been working with nations all over the world on programs to implement it. The reason I'm going back to the history is saying we are making some progress. We are evolving. The world today we're much more conscious of our collective responsibility to collaborate with each other and to focus on the welfare of individuals and not just the rulers who happen to be safeguard the rulers of monarchs or whoever is in charge of countries. So there's been an evolution. There's been an evolutionary progress. The reason we're focusing on human security is because to emphasize these 17 goals are collective goals. We have to address climate change, for example. We have to produce more food. We have to enforce human rights. But what the human security concept focuses on, the rights, the benefit of each individual. We're not finished with this until that security goes to every individual. Freedom from want, freedom from fear of persecution of any type on any basis, freedom to live a life of dignity. This is the foundation. And I mentioned that means food security, health security, ecological security for our environment, economic security, political security, the security of our community, and our security as human beings. So it's really trying to zero in or center on how far our society is really providing security to all its people. Everyone counts. It's human security for all.
Absolutely, and these are really great points, and thank you for sharing your insights with us. And I would like a little bit to discuss about the role of the government, the role of business, and technology. We know that the social change usually is driven by businesses and technology and science in general, and that the governments are falling up behind sometimes. Besides the fact that we certainly need a little bit more effective government, a more proactive approach on behalf of the governments, what are, if there are any, changes that needs to be applied on the way that businesses and technology work, their concepts and their priorities? Do you have any insight on that?
Well, absolutely. And I already spoke to it a little when I mentioned our experience with the Consumer Electronics Show, because that's an example. But we think the message, we chose one very important industry who recognized the truth in this and wanted to collaborate with us and is still collaborating with us. But that message goes out to all business community all over the world. You know, I won't go through the details of the economic evolution, but over the last 40 years, some strange ideas emerged in modern economy that a business is only there for the profit of its owners and its shareholders. And that was never the original intention. When business was first incorporated, it was incorporated because society recognized business has a positive role to play for serving the society. And modern economic theory got kind of carried away by the idea of maximizing profit, as if it has no responsibility in the world. And there is a major effort now, particularly in the last decade, for companies to recognize their social responsibility. Company is a social institution. It doesn't just belong to the people who own it. There are the employees, there are the suppliers, there's the community in which it's based. It makes use of our infrastructure of roads and ports and airports and so many things and all. It's there because we need business, we need private enterprise, as we need government for the thriving of the society. But that brings with it not only privileges and opportunities, it brings with it responsibilities. And that is being recognized now. You know, for example, in the last 10 years, particularly the last 5, what they call ESGs, environment, society, and government, that businesses have a responsibility not only to the shareholders, they have a responsibility not to spoil the environment, not to disturb the society, and to support the government and live according to the laws of the government. And now there's a movement that is gaining a lot of momentum where the banks, for example, in fact, our colleagues at Force for Good have just completed their third year of studying of the top financial institutions in the world, top 100 private financial institutions in the world, asking them how much of the money that you are investing or lending to industry is really going into things that will benefit human beings, that will benefit society, that will help us address our environmental problems, our social problems, even our political problems and all. And there is a real movement there. We just came out with a new report on force for good, capital as a force for good, and technology as a force for good. How far is technology really aware of its response? Are the businesses aware of their responsibility, and how far are they trying to do this? I think we're still at the early stage. The idea is prevalent. The awareness is there. Banks are recognizing it and changing their policies. Large corporations are the statistic is about 70 or 80% of the large corporations are already giving importance to these criteria. But we still have a long way to go. Our universities that have pension funds, are they investing those pension funds in oil production, or are they investing it in renewable energies? As an example, there are many such. We still have a long way to go, but there's a greater recognition today than ever before. We're all in this together, and business and as science and government all have major responsibility to contribute and address.
And this is a great message and outcome of our conversation, and thank you for sharing this. You mentioned about the role of universities. You just mentioned the word universities, and automatically our mind goes to education. And we know that when education thrives, we see great progress on technology and science. At the same time, do you think that there are some fundamental limitations on how education provides knowledge to the younger generations about how we are going to be able to prepare ourselves for confronting any threats to human security? What is the role of education at the end of the day, and how you see any need for any changes in the educational system in general?
It's a really big and really important question. In fact, so important that back in 2014, the academies created a new organization called the World University Consortium, which I also head, on how to build an educational system that will really effectively meet the needs of the future. Education, I consider education probably the greatest invention of humanity of all time. More than anything else, apart from language, of course, apart from anything else, it distinguishes us from the other life.
Everything starts and finishes in education. And actually, I think that you would agree that the level of our civilization, the level of our democracies, the level of our progress and progressive approach in our society depends on how effective and efficient is the education provided to the younger generations, right?
You said it very well. Exactly. Education is the method that we have for passing on all the knowledge of the past generations for thousands of years to the next generation. So they don't have to reinvent the wheel and they don't have to make all the mistakes we've made in the past. That's the idea. The problem we have with education, and I'm not saying this as a criticism, I'm trying to, as a social scientist, I'm trying to understand it. The problem is things are changing so fast. The technology is not the only thing. Law, the movement of people around the world, the climate, everything is changing so fast that it's not enough that we teach what we learned in the past. The knowledge of the past is no longer sufficiently relevant. In technology industries, they'll tell you the students who come out of a higher education in engineering know more than those who have been in the companies for 5 or 10 years because the technology's advanced so much. I'm just giving an example. The same is true in medicine. It's true in law, in finance, and think the world is changing so fast. Problem is our educational system is not geared up to change as quickly as society. It used to take decades or centuries for us to put into the education what we had learned in the past. Now, if we're a year behind, we're already out of date. Education is a conservative institution in the sense we try to collect all the past knowledge. But the future knowledge, how do you collect it? You have to experience it and codify it and figure out what's important and what's true. So there's a fundamental problem of the speed. Sorry.
No worries. We are live, so we know that sometimes things can happen unexpectedly.
I turned it off now.
Calls.
Sorry. I should have turned it off.
No worries.
But there is more issues. It's not just the fact. It's a challenge for humanity, and it's a challenge for our educational system. What do you do if I was educated as I was 55 years ago, finished my education, and I'm teaching youngsters today? Am I teaching what I learned? Am I teaching what was relevant at that time? Or am I really teaching what they need to know about the future, which is much less clear and certain, and we don't even agree on it. So we have a time warp in education, we can say. We're just not able to keep up with the pace of change. But we also have other fundamental problems, and one of them that we think is very important is we started out, universities started out about 500 years ago with only 5 subjects. You had history, you had literature, you had mathematics, and so forth, and religion was there, and so forth. And now, in the U.S. alone, we teach more than 1,000 subdisciplines because knowledge is so great. It's becoming more and more specialized. You need to be more and more of an expert in order to do it. The problem is, it's kind of the old proverb: we lose sight of the forest when we focus on the tree. We see this, the more we specialize, the more we lose perspective of the whole. And now we've divided reality, knowledge, into so many parts. They're all operating as kind of separate silos. And it's very difficult for scientists who are experts in a particular field to understand what's going on in other fields, or to understand the implications of that. And I'll give you just one very practical example. A few years ago, we had a conference with IEEE, which is the global organization of electrical and electronic engineers. They're the ones who are educating the next generation of artificial intelligence scientists and so forth. And we asked them, how much do those you are educating today understand about the society for which they are developing this technology, and about the possible opportunities and the possible threats that could arise from the new technology and it's very topical today with Chat GPT and all. We're all wondering, is this good or bad? Is it going to help education or undermine it? So I'm giving this is a fundamental problem. Our knowledge is so specialized, so fragmented, that very few people get an education today that helps them understand the whole world in which we live. And unless we understand those implications, we cannot properly act. My technology, my food production, will it destroy the soil or exhaust the water table? My producing more energy, will it change our climate? We can't say, well, that's not my field. I'm not responsible for that. Somebody else is responsible for climate. I'm only responsible for creating energy. It's not my fault if we run out of platinum or whatever the scarce materials. My is to design things. So we have a fundamental problem that we've gone so specialized. The idea of a liberal arts education, which means a broad-based exposure to understand the world. As citizens, That's really important. How am I to understand when I read the paper in the morning what I read about health or a
Absolutely.
law or governance or technology? So we need a change, in a fundamental change in our educational system, to recognize that all dimensions of our lives are important, and they're all interconnected. And that may sound like an impossible task, but I think it's not impossible. When it's not impossible, and we are working now, that's one of the major projects of the Academy, to show that the relationships between fields are as important as the fields themselves. And just one obvious example is, for 200 years, or let's say 180 years, we had great economists and economic theory that ignored the environment. It took assumption that environment is there and we can keep taking the water and the minerals and the petroleum and everything else. But now, no serious economist can ignore the fact that we have to also understand the environmental impact of what we do, what we produce, and what we
That's
discard. So we do need a very fundamental change in how we structure education at different levels from the lowest up. And if I could just mention one other factor, and we don't have to dwell on it, but just to put it on, there's also a critical issue of access to education.
absolutely, yeah. And
And
we've
so,
seen that also in COVID-19 situation, and how technology can actually close the gap of accessing from those countries where population have easily access to technology, and through technology to education, and how we can challenge, how we can address this issue of inequality in accessing education because of inequality in accessing technology.
and you've given a very good example of the positive potential of technology to help solve a lot of the problems which it has helped to create. But we need technology for education. In fact, we have a conference coming up next month on education for human security, and how each subject that we're now learning can be and needs to be reoriented in order to put the impact on people, the impact on individual welfare and security at the center, and make that critical. We asked this question at the United Nations in Geneva back in 2013 at a conference. If you wanted to create a global system of, let's say, higher education to start with, that could provide world-class knowledge, quality, at the affordable price, accessible to everybody who wants it, how would you do it? And we've been asking this question to conference experts all over the world in the last decade, and everybody agrees only on one thing: you wouldn't do it the way we're doing it now. Because the way we're doing it now is very costly. It's very specialized. UNESCO came up with a study about a decade ago saying we'd have to create a university in order to meet the need over a 15-year period. We'd have to create a new university the size of Harvard, 5 a week for the next 15 years. So that's 52 times 5, about 250. Harvard's hundreds of years old. It's more than 200-year-old institution. You don't just pop them up that way, which means we need to think of new delivery systems. And as you say, technology has a critical role to play in that. Imagine today that anybody anywhere in the world who had a mobile phone could have access to the best instructor in the world, speaking in his language, not the instructor's language, but the language because we have technology that can translate like that now. And he couldn't do it for virtually free. How far are we away from that now with the system we have? So I think we're going to see we have a lot of disruption taking place in education, as we have in other fields. We need a lot of disruption. We need revolutionary change to come up with the system that we we need, and it'll take us decades to do it because education doesn't change that fast. But once we do that, that's going to help those who are in less prosperous countries, less advantaged, to kind of close the gap and skip generations of the old method. And I think we'll see development accelerating in those places. I spend a lot of time in India, and I see how much the country has progressed in the last 2 decades, largely because it's able to jump. It's able to jump to the and not go through all the years and decades that we went through to figure out how to use the technology in education for beneficial purposes. We have a long way to go, but it's very promising that that education won't have to bankrupt students in the future or put us in debt for decades to get through it. But we're not there yet.
We've discussed a lot of complicated issues in a manner of only 45 minutes, and I'm sure that we are going to have you again, Garry Jacobs, back for another educational program, especially after the conference you mentioned in a month from now. Where is it taking place related?
It's an online conference, so anyone who would like to join it would be free. It's going to be from March 7th to 9th.
We would like to have this information to share it with the community of foreign journalists.
Very happy to
and we will follow up with that. Before we conclude this conversation, this very insightful conversation with you, Garry, my question is a little bit of a broader question about how would you envision our world in 15, 20 years from now related to human security? What countries do you think they are going to play a pioneering role in preparing their societies and our world for a better response on protecting human security? And what makes you be a little bit scared of potentially? What are the fields that you have some concerns how situation is developing?
Well, the concerns are easy to talk about because I think we all share them. Anyone who reads the paper or knows what's going on in the world. We have humanity as a whole faces unprecedented challenges today. That's the irony. At the same time, we have unprecedented opportunities and capacity for good. We are facing unprecedented challenges, partly because of globalization, because we're all mixed together now and we can't just function as separate communities, and we have to learn how to live and cooperate with each other. Partly because of the growing prosperity, which is undermining our environment, partly because of the growing population, which creates new needs and appetites before, and partly because our institutions, as we talked about education and business and government, and even our multilateral institutions, haven't caught up with the needs of the time. So it's easy to talk about the challenges and it's easy to be pessimistic. I think my own approach and what we've been doing in the academy is to try to understand how we got here. And, this is not the first time we've had challenges. We read through 2 world wars in the first half of the 20th century, unprecedented calamities which involved tens of millions of people and dislocated the world. It's nothing new, but today we have a greater capacity to respond. But what's lacking, I think, today, and what we're looking for and trying to work for is, it's not enough that we rely on governments to solve these problems. Our governments were built up for a different purpose. They were founded to each responsible for a particular piece of land, whether it's very small or very big, and a particular group of people who somehow were their citizens and responsible for them. But those institutions are not enough today. I was raised in California, and during the 60s, the environmental movement just began as a very small thread, and then gained movement in the 70s and all. But, it wasn't government that did it. It was people. It was communities. In Los Angeles, we said we're tired of inhaling this smog. In other areas, it was the pollution of crops by fertilizers and other things, and so many things were there, water shortages, garbage, clean, destroying the atmosphere and so forth. But it was people. And our message today is we can't solve these problems just by relying on our governments. We need the whole of society and every part of civil society to contribute. So we've talked already about business. We've talked already about the scientists and the scientific community. We had a meeting last month at the UN in New York with religious and interfaith groups who represent maybe 1 billion people or more in the world in their membership. And what is the role of our religious institutions in not only trying to say our religion is more true or better than somebody else's, but we are all in this together. There are universal principles and we need to join hands. And there are wonderful institutions and dedicated people who recognize that that our common values are really important. We have to come together as human beings in our values, even if we have different traditions and different beliefs. We have the arts community, our artists, arts in all sense, from our writers and our poets and our musicians and our cinema actors and our movies and all, are a tremendous force in society. If we can mobilize them to help us create awareness, not just of the problems, but the solutions to those problems, we have enormous power to accelerate our social progress. And of course, we have the youth organizations. We've seen youth playing an unprecedented role in concern with climate change, warning us and trying to demand that the older generations take it seriously and do something. And we have social media networks that connect the billions of people together. We never had that when I was growing up, the way capacity to link with each other. So I think what I'm getting at is I think we have to all recognize it's not just the scientist who's responsible. It's not just the government official. As citizens, we all have a power to influence, and we all have a responsibility to contribute to making the world better. And our educational system should teach us that, should impart that sense. So when we come out of whatever education we have, we recognize that we not only understand the world we live in, but we are able to contribute positively to addressing the problems. We're all part of the problem, or we're all part of the solution. So I guess if I may sound a little idealistic now, but I think what we need and what the Academy is working for is what we really need is a global social movement of humanity to say we're all in this together and we're going to work together. And if we do, and if we agree on that, there's no problem that we face today that we cannot solve. In Hollywood, it's always the alien invasion that unites humanity. Anything less than that, we're fighting with each other. But when the aliens come, now our alien invasion is called climate change.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Garry. I want to say that you sounded visionary. You gave the vision of what we really need to work all parts together in our world. No one can do something alone. We are all together on that. I appreciate sharing a lot of examples about stakeholders from artists and any other religious groups, any other stakeholders that they can get together and start developing this new concept of human security. It's difficult, it's complicated, it needs a lot of, as you said, cooperation, collaboration, and goodwill from everyone. It needs an open-minded, not narrow-minded approach. It needs investment in education, and it needs, as you said, social responsibility in technology and science. With these words, with this conclusion, I want to thank you again for participating in this educational program on behalf of the Association of Foreign Press Correspondents, AFPC-USA, here today. We certainly want to have you back, hopefully in person, either in New York or in Washington, D.C., wherever it is more convenient for you. And I want to thank you again, Garry Jacobs, President and CEO of the World Academy of Art and Science, for your presence here today.
Thank you so much, Thanos. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you very much.